Hello and welcome to Veterans of the Valley. I'm Tom Turpeville. Before Ivo Junek enlisted in the Army, he was a member of the Tree Army. It's also known as the Civilian Conservation Corps. A member of the 91st Infantry Division in the European theater, he spent most of his combat days in Italy. While he was serving in Europe, his three brothers served in World War II in the Pacific. Please welcome with me a proud native of Snook and World War II gunner, Ivo Junek. Ivo, it's a pleasure to have you on Veterans of the Valley. I want to jump forward, and then we'll jump back to your getting into the service, but I want to jump forward to you and your brothers all serving in World War II at the same time. This is kind of an oddity. Obviously, it was done, but you were all serving at the same time, three brothers in the Pacific and you in Europe. This must have been a matter of some concern for your parents. Sort of talk about that dynamic of your service.
Well, I'm sure it was, because I know they hated to see us go, but they knew this had to be done.
Right.
And, you didn't have cell phones and all the communications you have today, so it was sometimes months before we even got to talk. Well, by mail, it usually took about a month for the mail to get over to Europe or the Pacific. I'm sure it wasn't any better.
Right, right.
And they made it, but I did have one. The oldest brother did not go.
Right.
He did get his draft call.
Right. That's an interesting story too, because he was actually at A&M. He was at Sabisa Hall serving as a cook, I guess, at
Correct.
Sabisa Hall. And they didn't want him to go because he was serving his country in a way by cooking for the people that were getting ready to go to the military here at Texas A&M. Talk about him.
Well, yes, he really started at A&M at Sabisa back about 1936, and well, he retired from there.
Right.
Later years, but yeah, and he was really the only one that, like my daddy, has never driven anything but a Model T Ford, which had the three pedals.
Right.
So when they needed something, he'd go check on them at least once a week. Drove to Snook, find, and but the draft board was still going to draft him, even though he had three children. And I do know that someone from Sabisa, and I'm not going to mention names because I'm not positive.
Right.
But I think I know who it was, wrote the draft board a letter that they ought to be ashamed of themselves calling him to serve, because he had three children, had parents that needed him, and worst of all, he said, we need him as a cook, and he's doing the same job here he will be doing after if he was to go into service.
Right.
And so it wasn't no time that they sent him a deferment.
Right.
And he did not have to go, so he was here to take care of my parents while we were all gone.
I want to talk about your own service in World War II. Talk about that. You did serve in Europe. You were in infantry, 91st Infantry Division. Talk about what your job was. You were a gunner with a couple of different weapons. Talk about what you did.
Well, really, the main job was a gunner on a 155 howitzer. Mm-hmm. And I was in the 348 Field Artillery Battalion, which is one of the battalions that was in the 91st Division.
Right.
And, well, it did there's about 11 different jobs on a gunner on 155. So you have your chief of section, your ammunition corporal, your gunner, and the cannon, about 6 cannoneers, I think. And really in combat, you may have been assigned to a certain post, but everyone did what they had to do. You may have been on the gun, well, the sights.
Right.
At one time, then you may have been loading shells on the tray, because one of the shells weighed 98 pounds.
Right.
Plus the fuse, and then you had to have a fuse. Someone fused the shell and set the timing, or Well, you had different fuses. Some were fuse that would go off on impact. Some fuse went off by timing, and you had to, and the time the set 'em was given to us from the forward observer,
Right, right.
who was usually on a high point in front of us.
Yeah. You had to carry these shells through the mud. That's one thing you remember exactly how muddy it was when you were serving in the Apennine Mountains in that area.
Yes, before it froze, it rained.
Yeah.
And rained.
And rained.
And the trucks could not get into the gun sections, so we had to carry these one by one to the gun section. And well, it was a mess. We welcomed the freezing weather.
Right. You
snow.
remember the date that it froze, November the 11th, when it first froze.
The first snow was what we called Armistice Day.
Right.
November 11th.
Right.
And we didn't see the ground again till sometime in March.
Yeah, but it was easier to walk through the snow than the mud.
Oh, very much.
Yeah.
It seemed like it wasn't too bad. The snow wasn't bad at all compared to the drizzling, freezing rain.
Right. You want to backtrack a little bit. You had gone over, when you went over, you landed in Scotland, and then from England, you actually went to Normandy Beach, but didn't stay there because you were then called to Italy, right?
Yeah, right. Well, see, now this was not on D-Day.
Right.
By the way, D-Day was my 21st birthday, too.
I see. Right.
This was after.
Yeah, it's a couple of months after D-Day.
Right. And we went, got far as Cherbourg, and the casualties were heavy in Italy. So they flew us on into Italy. However, it took us 2 days. We stopped to spend the night in Lyon, France, and then flew the rest of the way. And I didn't think about this the other day, but I was sitting in the pilot's seat. The pilot went back, put it on automatic pilot. I was in charge of the group that of the soldiers that was on the plane, and so he put me in his seat while the co-pilot was there, and we were riding along heavy over in the clouds. We're flying in formation. So, and all of a sudden we hit a bright spot, no clouds at all, and there was a big old rock sticking out of, and so now he kind of gave me a little thing. He said, now if you want to go up, you got to pull back. If you want to go down. First time I've ever been in a cockpit of a plane.
Right.
And so I pulled it, and the other pilot, he did the same thing, and we just went up, and we dodged it because we're flying low over the Alps.
Right.
And we flew into Pisa, and then we circled. I saw the leaning tower from the air before I saw it from the ground.
Indeed, indeed. That must have been a little frightening. A rookie pilot, you look up and there's a mountain in front of you.
Well, the pilot told me, he says, you know what, you were as close to death as you'll ever be without dying.
Oh, my goodness.
But what I was going to say then, about 6 or 7 years ago, we made several trips back to Europe since. And we were up in Switzerland, and you go up that high, you don't get there's no gasoline engines. It's all electric, even the tracks pulling you up. Well, when we got up there, saw Matterhorn sticking out of snow, and that looked like the same piece of rock that I seen they ran into. That we nearly
almost
hit.
ran into.
So I'm not sure that was it, but it sure looked the same. And I forgot about that until I saw that piece, that Matterhorn sticking out from under the snow.
You said that there were several consecutive days of resistance that you encountered in the Apennine Mountains and that area. Talk a little bit about that. You talked about how the enemy would come out of tunnels. It kind of reminded me of sort of Mount Suribachi at Iwo Jima over Japan, how the Japanese tactics of fighting were sort of the same way, that they would dig tunnels, and that's what you were sort of fighting against. Sort of talk about the resistance that you saw.
Well, most of the tunnels, they had what we called railroad guns. They were big guns on a railroad track that pull them back in, and they pull out and fire and then pull back in. And I don't know what size of shell they fired, but it was big. And what really helped us, I guess, being in artillery was probably one of the safest places being on the front line. Because even people behind us got shelled with the big guns. And now we got strafed and the small fire, but the big fire went over us. We'd hear it. You could hear those projectors going over us.
Right.
And we were. To me, I never really felt I knew I was in danger, but I mean, I didn't feel like I was going to ever get wounded or killed or anything.
Right. There were a lot of casualties, but you never felt like you were going to be one of them.
Right.
You were doing your job.
Now, I was close enough to casualties, the explosions, where the flash of one of my buddies hit my face, but that was. Then I did get shrapnel apart in my hair once.
Yeah.
I didn't have my steel helmet on, I guess.
That taught you something there. Talk about, is it Livonia?
Livonia?
Livonia.
Livonia.
Yeah. Talk about that.
Well, that
was in Italy, right?
That was in Italy. That was between us and Bologna.
Right.
And it's on the north side of the Apennines. Is a high point.
Yeah.
Good observation point. And then Mount Madone, I think, was the next one down that was real of the high mountain. And it supposed to have changed hands 3 times in one day.
Right.
And when we finally took Livonia and a little beyond, well, the casualties were terrible. In fact, there's one corner that the infantrymen named Purple Heart Corner, because every time they tried to get around there, they got wounded or killed. But naturally, by that time, there was freezing, snow was on the ground, and the bodies froze, and they'd put them in mattress covers and hauled out on a truck, kind of like we used to say, stacked cordwood.
Right, right.
And
how old were you at this time? About?
I was 21.
21. So you were still a young kid
Yes.
from Snook, Texas.
Right.
How? You said you were just doing your job, but you're a young guy. There's people shooting at you. You're shooting at people. You're seeing bodies. How does a young man sort of how does he process that?
Well, I don't know. I guess we were trained to do that, because I can remember when I first went to Fort Knox.
Right.
One of the first speeches I've heard, and I don't know if it's a general, a lieutenant, or just another private, but they had us there. First thing he said, you must learn to kill or get killed. In other words, you have to learn to kill or get killed.
Right.
And I guess that's why, you knew you had things to do. Now we were trained for hand-to-hand combat, which I never had to get into.
Right.
Now I would say that'd be probably the worst thing a person would have to do.
Indeed.
In hand-to-hand combat.
Indeed. We hear the term so much now since Tom Brokaw invented it, the greatest generation, but it's stories like this that make us, I think, find out why they're called the greatest generation. Certainly a unique generation as far as how they felt about life and death. It's different certainly than it was today. I want to go to some photographs, because you have some magnificent photographs of you and your outfit and some of your war buddies. And I'd like to go to those now and have you talk about them. First off, that's a wonderful portrait of you. How old were you there? You look like a rookie there. When was that taken?
Sometime in 43.
In 43.
See,
just as you were going in.
Right. Shortly after I was in, I'd say 43. It had to be.
Right. You were inducted in February of 1943, so it was probably right around there.
Mm-hmm.
Good-looking soldier. Let's move on. What are we looking at there?
Now, that was in training here in the States.
Uh-huh.
See, that's self-propelled M7 tank, that turret there is a 50 caliber machine gun.
And you're holding the shell
And
there,
I'm holding the
bottom
shell.
left, right?
Mm-hmm. Now those are small.
Those are small. Those aren't the 98 pounders.
Oh no, one person handles those.
Okay.
And that's in the States.
Right. Now, what are you sitting on there? Is that a...
Oh, that's the breech of the gun. See right when my leg kind of comes over and sets. See those two lines on each side? That's how the recoil comes back on those.
I see.
All the way to the
on
end.
Those tracks.
On those tracks. And that little hole that's right below me, that's where the shell, you shove it in there and then it closes.
I see. Okay.
I never noticed that before.
Right. There's another picture, I guess, same time.
Yeah. That's
Matter of fact, that shows a little bit better.
Well, that gets
as you're
ready.
about
That's getting ready to
load
the shell. Huh?
Right. Right.
That
These
is.
are marvelous pictures. Okay, now this is, we haven't really talked about you going overseas, but you left from New York Harbor, and this picture was taken at Times Square, you and your buddies enjoying a little refreshment before you headed over to Europe, right?
Yes, I found this just a few days ago.
Right.
Again.
And that's you on the right?
That's me on the right. Then there's one next to me was from Minnesota. His last name is Havisto. And the third one, I don't remember his name. I remember the face. The next one would be a guy named Herod. And then the next to the last, I don't remember, but the last one was named Ralph Moats. I still remember those. I think the other two, I don't believe were in our gun sections, or maybe not even in our battalion.
Well, it's only 65 years ago, Ivo. I wouldn't expect you to remember all of the names. That's a long time ago. Look at the faces, though, there of those soldiers, and I look at those faces, and those are guys who are not, they're not under duress. They're not protesting where they're about to go. These are guys that you can just see by the look on their face that are proud to go serve in the war.
Well, that's
and they're
true.
looking forward to going over. That's a marvelous picture. It really is. Let's move on to the next one. This is your volleyball team?
That's our volleyball team. After the war was over, we were up in right out of Trieste,
right
there on the Yugoslav border.
Yeah.
And we spent till around the 1st of August there, from last of May till the 1st of August. This must have been June or July. So we had to have something for a little entertainment. So we had volleyball tournaments.
Right.
And that was our team. I think we won the tournament. That's where we got our picture. And I can remember...
You're in the bottom left there again, right?
Right. Well, actually, now a while ago we said left was he facing it to the left.
Well, as we're looking at the picture, you're on the bottom left. Is that correct?
Of the picture.
Yeah, as we're looking.
Yeah, right.
Okay. Okay. As we're looking at the picture.
And I can't remember the lieutenant's name. He was a nice guy.
Right.
And I can't remember the other guy's name.
Right.
The tall one, let's start from left to right. I can't remember his name. The other one, gosh.
That's okay.
I had it the other day. Now, I remember the tallest one standing there is Jack Patterson from Salt Lake City.
Okay.
His name was J.A.P.
Yeah.
We called him a Jap. Jack A. Patterson. And I talked to him. I found him about 4 or 5 years ago. No, longer than that. About 7 years ago, we were flying to Alaska, and we had a layover in Salt Lake City.
Yep.
So I looked up Jack A. Patterson, and I called. And sure enough, it was his home, and he was there, and I talked to him.
There he was.
And
there he was.
Then we kept in contact for a while. I called last couple of times I called. They said it's not a working number, so.
Now he's a fellow on the top right as we're looking at the picture.
As we're facing the picture to the right.
To the right, standing up.
Standing up.
Yeah, there you go. All right, let's move on to the next one. Is that a howitzer?
That's a 155 howitzer. And that's what we call a ground mount. See,
right.
Spread those legs out, and then that's about what it took to fire one of those.
Indeed. Let's move on to the next one because I think we've got, that's pretty much the same group with the howitzer. Okay.
It is.
Where's this taken?
You know, that was in the States when we were out in the field. The ground was frozen.
Right. And that's you out in front.
That was me out in front, yes. And
okay.
I remember a couple of the guys' names yet.
That's okay. Let's move on to. Now these are you and your brothers,
right?
And it's kind of a rough picture there, but you can. This is taken out of a magazine, and I believe it says quartet.
Yes.
Of eunuchs from Snook in service.
Mm-hmm.
And so who are we looking at there? Top left, who is that?
Top left is my brother Ralph.
Uh-huh.
Now, he was in the Pacific.
Right.
He spent about I bet 2.5 years,
right.
Most of the time, or more, in the Pacific.
And then the bottom left?
Bottom left is Fred, well, he's the oldest of the ones that went in.
Right. And then the sailor in the middle?
The sailor is in the middle.
Who is that?
And Joe.
Joe? Okay. Joe. And then that's you on the right?
That's right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And there are the brothers. Now, this picture was just taken, what, a couple of years ago?
No.
At the World War II Memorial, right?
Right.
When you all went to visit.
October was a year ago.
Okay. And that's you and your family.
And the children? No, that's not all the family.
Not all the family. That's some of the family.
Just the children, and I think 6 grandchildren.
Right. You're sitting there in the middle. Your wife, Becky, is over there to the left in the back row, and then you and some children and grandchildren at the World War II Memorial. I got a chance to visit there this last December. It's a magnificent.
It really is.
It really is. Indeed, it is. Those are some great pictures. I want to backtrack a little bit, Ivo, and talk about you getting into the service, a young man from Snook. And I know that at first they wanted you to, somebody tried to talk you into being in the Seabees, but you went another direction.
The naval officer there wanted me to join the Navy.
Right.
He said we needed welders in the Seabees, and I was a welder by trade.
Right.
And my leaderman at the shipyard was all shook up just about a week before that because the Seabees landed on some island in the Pacific that before the Marines did and wiped them out. And I remember that whenever I went there and he's trying to get me to join the Seabees, so I finally said, join the Army, Navy, which they would have been signed to the Seabees.
Right.
Which would have been a good chance to learn another trade or maybe better myself at the trade I was in. But I'm not sorry I took the route I did because I did make it back, and I don't know what would have happened.
Well, we're not sorry too. Before we leave, and we're running out of time, but Ivo, you're the first person I know named Ivo. Talk about that name and how you got that name.
Well, my mother, so I was told, my mother read a book when she was a young girl, The Life of Ivo.
The Life of Ivo. And
she wanted that name. In fact, when some of her siblings had boys, she'd always tell them, name them Ivo. I want one of them named Ivo, even before she was married. So there was one of her nephews was named Ivo. He lived in Caldwell. He became a school teacher and a football coach down in the valley. But then finally, I was the 5th born, and so I got the name of Ivo.
You got the name Ivo.
And until last year, I didn't know I knew that she got the name out of a book, and I knew some other stories, but my 3 daughters were and about 4 of the grandchildren went to Rome to do some sightseeing, and they were in the trolley going down the street. My oldest daughter looked to the right. There she read a sign, Basilica of St. Ivo. So next day they had to go find it, and they even got a picture of it for me.
Yeah, that's tremendous. After the war, just to talk briefly, we just got a couple of minutes left. You went to work for the Lower Colorado River Authority. You opened a welding shop in Snook, and then you went for a temporary job at Shell Oil in Houston, and that temporary job lasted 38 years, right?
38 and a half.
What did you do there?
There?
Yeah.
Well, I started out as a general helper, labor more or less.
Right.
And then, you know, it was a very good job. It has a union job, and as positions come open, you'd sign up. If you'd want that job, you put your name down.
Right.
They call that bidding on a job.
I see.
Well, if you had the seniority to get it, you got it. But if you didn't, you just stayed where you were till you could. Well, I had a friend that has worked there for quite a while. In fact, he didn't pass his physical for the Army or service in World War II. He was working there, and he said, "Told me, Ivo," he said, "any of these jobs come open, bid on them."
Uh-huh.
He said, "You don't have to necessarily stay there. If you see something comes open that you like better, you can bid on that later.
Right.
But get your seniority started in the department."
Right.
So first job came open was in the warehouse.
And that's where you were. We're out of time, but I know that's where you spent your time in 38 years at Shell. And thank you for being here, but we are out of time.
Well,
It all goes too quickly.
It sure does.
Thank you. Ivo Junek and his wife Becky are both cancer survivors. Both lost their spouses in their retirement years, and then they found each other some 18 years ago. And now they enjoy their family, spending much of their time on their farm near Caldwell. We salute Ivo Junek for his World War II service, as we do all veterans. I'm Tom Turpeville. Join us again next time on Veterans of the Valley.